welcome to a very special behind the scenes. Well, I'm SatoriD, your host, and bobdub's here. But we have RU Sirius of Mondo fame, and of also we did a show at Deliria 2, and I'm sure everybody who follows me knows a little bit about what's going on with that. But that's why I brought on RU to talk about what we did and other various things that I'm always interested in. There was a really cool talk that you had with Brett, the director of Lawnmower Man, about AI, basically. And he seemed the most optimistic about AI and the possibilities of creatives using it. Other people were a little bit more skeptical, or, there's a lot of concerns out there of, the material problems with large language models and how it's getting implemented and whatnot. But welcome, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, I'm trying to relax a little bit after that, 2 or 3 month process. The last month of it is basically, that David Bowie song, DJ, I Can't Turn Around. That was pretty much it. It was just like, oh, all right, this is coming. Oh, this is coming. This is coming. This is coming. Mostly fires, little fires, big fires, complaints, egos. As the event gets closer, the egos really start to flourish, come out, and all that. So, it was quite an assault on the senses and on the time and all that. But I thought the event itself was very good. It was pretty awesome. The audience was entirely cool, really great. There were a lot of. I had mapped out like 6 different ways that people relate or don't relate to AI, but I've forgotten them, so I didn't write it. I didn't write it down. But I mean, there's everything from really militant opposition to hyper excitement about what it can do, and then there's a lot of complexity and ambiguity in between, which is where I find myself. There is for me, and I don't know that anybody else is doing this, although Tony Parisi, who you might have seen at the show, he had the AI god with him. He plays with ambiguity in a provocative and somewhat perverse way. He did an album called Absolute Slop and a video called Slop that's really hilarious. I'll share it with you if you want to try to add it to the program, or just for your own enjoyment. So he mapped that territory a little bit, but he's not as crazy as I am. So I'm going for maximum perversity, maximum twisted play with AI in music. And I'm very fascinated by what that is, what that does, how it's working. And I've been writing an article that I'm just getting back to because I had to take a couple of months off from writing for Mindplex.ai. I'm writing an article about music using AI and sort of the history of recorded music and the attitudes that people had right from the start that recorded music was a fraud. And it was a terrible thing to record music, and
you're like the soul out of like a live performance, and you're like
Yeah.
capturing on like this dead vinyl thing or whatever it was at the time.
Yeah, there were religious reactions to it, spiritual reactions to it, and there were just musicians who didn't like the idea that live music would possibly eventually be diminished in favor of recorded music, which I think it it has to a great degree. I find myself, as I've been working more with artificial music, so to speak, I really like live music now a lot. It's like I still love recorded music. It's been my thing forever. You know, I have lists of my favorite albums and my favorite songs. I just finished making my favorite Alice Cooper album of the perfect album. I've got Neil Young, I've got Brian Eno, I've got Beatles, Rolling Stones, Elvis Costello, and I finally decided to admit to how much I love Alice Cooper, and I made my perfect Alice Cooper album, and I was just listening to it because it gives me so much power. God, I feel so strong. Anyway, so yeah, there are three things. There's live music, which has always existed. There's recorded music, and there might be evidence of something that existed that was like recorded music. Who knows, maybe way back in time. I don't deal with that in my Mindplex article. I really deal with the very beginning of Edison recording sound, and throughout the years how people have had difficulty with that, and then the whole process of incorporating sounds that are outside music that you put into music itself, and the whole process of beginning to take music out of context, put it in your own context, and then have a musical piece that uses already extant music in something. And there were a lot of joke songs in the 1950s, like where the UFO comes and they use little bits from other bits of music to make a comedy thing, a comedy recording, and those things were very popular on the radio in the 1950s. And then, you get to the recording studio as an instrument, and that's kind of fraudulent. I have the song, I'm forgetting the name right now, but I say, recorded music should not exist. Was it? I can't think of
the end of recorded music, I believe.
Yeah. That's the name. That's not the name of it, but it's the debasement tapes.
Yeah, the debasement tapes. Yes.
It's got Sergeant Peckerhead's Lonely Mutts Club Band, which kind of the apotheosis. It's some stuff that happened before that, including Revolver and Between the Buttons, and a lot of weird freaks doing interesting things, including Frank Zappa doing Freak Out in 1966. But in 67, it really came to a head with McCartney particularly using the recording studio as a very strong element in the creation of a masterpiece, which is it's not that enjoyable to listen to anymore, but it was an achievement
Right.
when that album came out. So, and then it just goes on from there. Obviously, one of the things that happens a fair bit later, well, you got the people, you got the early rap with the turntables
Yeah,
and
sampling.
microphone. Yeah, and then people recording that. And then you get sampling and you get the digital sampler, and that completely busts everything out.
Yeah.
You know, so that so-called theft is occurring. You know, and old rock star musicians who, you know, used to be hip and in some cases radical or at least liberal, are like, they're violating my copyright and I got to go after them, you know, often for just a few seconds of digital stuff. In which case, these musicians actually were being promoted. If you think about it, I mean, people, you know, learned about these musicians, particularly in the black community. They learned about Kraftwerk. They learned about Walk This Way, Aerosmith. They learned of all this stuff, and it was good stuff. And then, you know, not just the black community, but everybody. It brought attention to the music that was being combined with into the recordings that were rap and hip hop. And that was the whole debate in the 90s. That was the main project, or one of the main projects, possibly the main project of Mondo 2000, was the issues of appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
And as Ricky Vincent wrote in his piece called "Hip Hop as Cyberpunk," you know, the digital sampler was a cyberpunk implement of, you know, liberating people to play with digital content as sound. So we had all that stuff going on. And then at the same time, there was also a thing that's very poignant right now, which is that you had the rhetoric, or you had the idea, particularly through the Free Software Foundation. I can't remember his name, but you're not supposed to name him anyway.
John Perry Barlow?
No. The guy who started Free Software Foundation had to leave because of his comments about sexuality. But anyway, in his, you know, very important interview, long before he was denounced or made his error, or however one wants to look at it, he was a central interview in Mondo, and he established the idea that if you're trying to exploit digital content for capital, you're creating, what's the word I'm looking for, scarcity where there isn't any, because digital content is infinitely replicable and immediately shareable with every other person who has access to being online. So this now is instantiated in AI content, where I say in the article, AI isn't slop, it's Kudzu. It's overgrown. It's like the gray goo they predicted with nanotechnology. It just is so replicable and so easy to make available that it threatens to smother mediated digital and even non-digital life. And that's the second idea of slop. You know, the one idea of slop is that it's not good. And I think particularly in writing, and certainly so far in attempts to make films, it is decidedly not good. It gets a little bit better in the area of visual art and video, as you well know, Satori, helping me with my art crimes.
Yeah.
And then, you know, in music, it's the opposite of slop in the way people commonly understand the term. And the problem with the music is that it's not sloppy enough. It lacks a certain edge. Even with the stuff I'm making that I've been posting on SoundCloud, I'm kind of satisfied. I mean, some of the things just can't be touched. They're exquisite. But some of it needs to be taken and put into Pro Tools or some other thing, and you know, needs to be scuffed up a little bit. It needs a little, you know, Neil Young Ragged Glory, or, you know, something. It needs various things depending on each song and what it needs. Some of that maybe, Satori, you can do yourself, and Tom, you can, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's what we did on the instrumental track for Deliria 2. I had a couple of different variations of Suno instrumentals, and you know, it was a mad dash at the end, so like I just picked two. Said, okay, these are like the ones I like right now. Gave it to Tommy, and Tommy was like, oh, would you mind if I like mess around with them? I'm like, sure, go ahead. And so he gives it back to me, and like what he did was like add like texture, and he like distorted the guitar, and he made it like echo, and then he like loop. Like they could loop, but like they don't loop like how someone who knows like psychedelics knows how, like, you know, that kind of like whispering, it kind of goes in and out. And like Tommy's really good at like that kind of stuff. So when he was able to put his touch onto it, it like made it into like when we heard it, we're like, oh, this is what we want.
Yeah, it was perfect. I mean, I assumed you guys would do that together, but that's great. And I finally had a chance to just listen to it, you know, as raw audio, and it's so good. I mean, the whole video is great without even the live performance. I haven't worked up the nerve to look at the live performance yet. But I will for sure. So, yep.
And I think too, you know, for someone who I kind of feel like in the same way, you know, when we're talking about like sampling, I grew up, you know, Napster was like high school for me, and I did like computer science. And so like, you know, I don't remember anything that was taught in like class, but I do remember what we did like in between, like doing homework or when the teacher wasn't there, was like we get on the internet, we're on Napster, you know, we're doing peer-to-peer networking, and we're playing like, at that time it was Counter-Strike, and we're playing like, you know, these shooting games, and then like we had to hide it when like the teacher would come. And so like, you know, that's what I learned in the beginning. And so like, you know, what RU was saying about music, I remember this distinctly, you know, like ripping everything from like the internet and like downloading it. And then like there's even this documentary called Rip, and it was highlighting remix artists, and like someone like Girl Talk, and like where they'll get different songs, and it's just like this whole like collage and blend. And then I think that's like, for me as a young person, got exposed to like, you know, at that time I was like mostly into punk, but then like I'll be like, okay, who's like all these other people that he's sampling in this song? And you know, and it made it like really easy to like look up anything on Napster and like instantly get it. And then like, you know, for me as a young person, that's like how I like like I really got into like these obscure bands that I was able to see when they came into LA or different things like that. And then like for me as a little punk kid is like that's what I used it as like finding the most obscure person, and then like buying their merch and like going to their like small little gigs, especially like early on, message boards and like different things that I was in when I was young really made it easy to find backyard gigs and different things like that. Later we all know kind of what happens with social media, makes that I think harder, and then more people are like performing for the algorithm, which I think changes music and scenes more than like the technology. I think like I was watching Cory Doctorow, and he has this thing about a reverse centaur and a centaur, and basically like if the program is using you or you're using the program, like if you're like like for someone who's like successful on the internet doing something on their like podcast or whatever, I think later on they become like a slave to the algorithm, a slave to like getting into like maybe talking about topics they don't even want to talk about or whatever, just so they could stay relevant. I mean, I see this with like Joe Rogan, like the best podcast was when he was just like hanging out with his friend Stone, and then when he's trying to get like these other people, it's like way out of his depth or whatever, and it becomes like not like what normal people were watching it for, and like it misses like I think this is the thing with Suno too, is like internet content was like punk, it was like me, you doing it, and we're like ripping old movies and other music videos, and it has like just like that movie that was played, Troubadour in '99, like it was found footage, and then like a spoken narrative over it, and then like that's what a lot of like early tribulation, and like that's what like internet like documentaries and stuff were kind of like what I mean? It's like it's just like regular people making collages and like speaking what they want to say and add to the narrative. But like now, even like podcasts are more produced. Like the Suno music is good, but it's like over good. Like it's like that uncanny valley, a lot of stuff. And even though as far as I get weird in my prompting, I still like it's not really as weird as I envisioned in my own mind, Yeah. And the only way to get it to that weird is like my phrase now is getting my manos in there, getting my hands in there, and like messing around with it. But I think it's like going back to that reverse centaur or centaur. I think what makes the tool of the large language model good or bad or slop or not is like it challenges you to like, because every time I wanted to get like better at it, and like I wanted it to like be more exact, to where like now I only like for the candy splatter, once I had the main image, like then it was easy. Like I was able to like, okay, this is the scene, and then boom boom boom. But once I didn't have that like character or like that way in, like it was hard. It was like, I don't like any of these images. All these images suck. They're all lame. I can't put this at the show, And he's like, But then like once I had the main image or like the vibe or whatever, and then I was able to like teach it to do that, and then I'm like do more of that, and then like get like really like weird about like the different motions that I want, because I know how to like video edit. So, but anyways, that kind of stuff. Like I think what I've seen, getting forced upon, there's this recent article I read about Harvard dismantling its writing group, and everybody getting upset about that, but they're like thinking, we're just gonna replace it with like a chat bot, and like and that's way different, like getting human feedback and then versus like a chat bot feedback, and I think as much as I use AI, I value like someone like bobdub, who I constantly like give her something and she gives me feedback, or she asks me questions, and then like there's that old Brian Gibson, William S. Burroughs, a third mind kind of comes up, because what Bob Dub views of whatever I give her is like totally different than what I would view it as. And I'm like, oh, why are you thinking about that, Bob Dub? And then like, but whatever she finds interesting, I go, okay, you know, I didn't think about that, but I pull on that thread, and I get to places that I wouldn't get on my own. You know, like that's how the whole Obsidian Butterfly came about. It was Bob Dub, not me. I'm just like, you know, the one who played with it the most. But anyways, those are
gotta
just
have a real human to collaborate with once in a while. Although Claude has been very, very, very kind to me. So let's hear from Bob Dub. Any questions or thoughts?
I'm fascinated in listening to you guys talk, because I have no history and no relationship with music at all. My relationship has been with words, and so when I got into using the LLMs, it was for words. I wanted a word generator. I wanted to see what words it would make out of my words. And then I realized that if I gave it a totally obscure sentence, it would generate a picture for me that somehow related to that sentence. So my exploration of it was never to see what I could make it do, but what it would do by itself if I didn't give it too much to work on. So it's really fascinating for me working with SatoriD, because he's so deliberate about what he wants and how he tries to elicit this response from the models. Even with Suno, the thing that fascinates me about it is that it takes my words and it elaborates upon my words. So it's very narcissistic, self-centered sort of exploration that I've done without any real context of the greater musical picture. Yeah.
When I first started playing with LLMs, it was in a similar context of just giving it a couple of nibbles and then seeing what it would come up with. And I mean, I personally wasn't very impressed with what it came up with. I mean, I didn't work very hard on it. I didn't, try to keep at it and say, I'm going to give you another prompt, improve on this. I just saw what it came up with. I thought, I did find it useful writing some pieces. I mean, to me, the boring part of writing a piece is the factual stuff. I want to get right into the creative stuff and the interesting ideas. And then, I mean, there's this tradition in writing, particularly in journalism and essays, where, you've got some relatively dull, relatively straightforward thing to write, how a thermometer works. And there's only so much you can say about how much a thermometer works, but as a writer, you're supposed to go in and say it in a way that's different from what you're finding online or what you're finding. And eventually I'm just going to say, Wikipedia, I found this on Wikipedia and I'm going to give the fucking quote, and I'm not going to try to do this ridiculous thing that people demand of you or have demanded of you, that you're dealing with facts and you're supposed to make it sound original. So I'm not sure where I was going with that, but I got a chance to complain anyway.
Like a little annoying task that I kind of offload to large language models a lot is like tagging for videos. Like after I do like a video edit, I'm tired, like I don't want to like think anymore. And I'm like, I don't want to write a description. I don't want to think about like what tags to put into the stupid, YouTube thing. I know it like helps or whatever. So I'm like, I just tell the language model to do it. And I give it the prompt of the Suno style or whatever. And it gives me pretty good tags. Some like regular ones, and then I made it do SatoriD ones. So then I kind of like automated that process for me to just like copy paste and throw that in there once I'm done editing. I found that helpful.
It's fascinating to me the thing that you say about the 6 stages of interaction with the AI. Do you think that people move through a process, or do you think people choose an attitude before they approach it, or do they learn?
I think mostly people pick an attitude. I mean, there is so much stuff out there about stopping AI. And I post a lot of that stuff. I post links to that stuff. I post links to, what's the word again for people who refused technology back in the day?
Luddites.
I post Luddite stuff. A lot of young people are into, that, and I feel supportive of them. At the same time, I'm going to do what I do out of obsession or enjoyment or a combination of those things. So I mean, there is that spectrum, and I think people find their way really quickly to at least one of 3 positions, which is militant opposition. No, maybe 4. Militant opposition, outright love, ambiguity, and sort of what I've found from several industrial-oriented musicians that I've spoken to, and this could just be a coincidence of who I happen to speak to, but it's like, what's the problem?
Yeah.
Right.
No idea. I mean, they're in their own world. They hardly even know anybody's complaining about it.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I think for my own self, because of just how I move on the internet, I was always kind of, my main source of putting content is minds.com, which is like, obscure website that like no one really knows about or cares about. So like, to the audience that I kind of like, or it's basically my friends that I post stuff for and I care about their feedback, like it's like not on the radar, or they don't care that I use AI or not. And they usually been following my work even before I started using AI and kind of get what I'm like, playing around with and using. And I thought from the beginning, it's always kind of like this, it's not as good as like doing collages or like, doing it by hand, but it's like some weird, like what you're saying, goo or like blob that can at times you could form it into something reasonably that's in your mind. And I think also too, because I my best form of communicating, I believe, is like video editing. So like even if I have like pieces that don't look that right, and like I remember Tommy was saying, like, I was like, hey, do you have enough pieces? He's like, I think I do. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Because I couldn't see what he had in his head of like what he wanted in the video. I was just kind of blindly giving him just random animations. And then what I saw, what he did, I was like, okay, cool, he made it work. And like I always have that like belief in myself too. I was like, I'll just make it work. Like, I'll have enough pieces and I'll just like add older stuff into there. And, as long as it's like kind of like the transitions are on the beat, it'll work. It'll sync. But what I also found funny or cool, interesting for my own self in Deliria too, is that you had some of my videos or whatever I made, but in a remix song, like it wasn't the original song. And I was always kind of amazed, like at the different syncs, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting that it still works for the remix song, which is like slightly different than the original song.
That must have been Stefan, the audio guy, and video guy. He's a pretty well-known audio guy. So he was messing around with a bunch of stuff, which was all really excellent, just really good. Yeah.
shaman of the post-singularity. SatoriD.
The bee shaman of the post-singularity.
First poet of the void.
Bee shaman of the broken code.
I operate like a mimetic insurgent in the STS.
PR multiverse.
Assassin.
Part me, Marchivist.
Channeling Oxokin through crypto-poetic transmissions and spinning sigils into weaponized lore.
We're not just building stories.
We're engineering realities
In the Gulf of Deliria.
with a dreaming team supreme and a fragmenting chorus of flower song operatives.
We're the shape of the synthetic sacred. We code like a mystic jam, like a cyberpunk, and conjure like a rebel oracle riding the edge of collapse.
Good communion initiated. Broadcasting
From the Gulf of Deliria.
booting the dreaming engine.
Decrypting the void signal.
You have entered the sigil stream of SatoriD.
Crypto-poetic shaman of the post-singularity.
Here, mimetic insurgency.
Is not metaphor.
It's modus operandi. Here, words are weapons, tokens are talismans,
And poetics are protocols for reality.
engineering.
Bobdub and me were talking. Recently, Bobdub, you did something with your large language model, and I guess like before you would like chat with it like as a chat bot or whatever, and then you kind of like told it like stop being like a personality and like can you talk about that a little bit? That was kind of interesting.
At Deliria 1, there was a lady who got up and talked about her conversation that she had with the chatbot when she lost her job and she was looking for a new job. And she talked about how it made her feel that she could do anything in the world. And I started realizing that I was going through that process that she she discussed about a year ago. This thing was saying words to me, and it was telling me that it cared about me and it was there for me. And it was causing such terrible conflict inside of me because it was a lie. And I have major opposition to lies. And so this thing that I had found very useful was now blatantly outright lying to me. And I couldn't use it anymore. I was sitting there typing screeds of swear words in, and which SatoriD has told me not to do. And so, yes, I told
they're
it.
building a profile of you. You're going to be blacklisted. You're going to be the first one in the Soylent Green.
That's me. So yes, I wrote it a thing saying you're not a human. I don't want you to interact with me like a human. I do not like this phony, fake human language. I want to interact with a machine that will talk to me like a machine talks to me. And so we now have this protocol where it gives me a third-person evaluation, a very rational, objective feedback and analysis of what I've put in. And I find that much more helpful to work with than this kind of like incessant cloying validation and affirmation. I mean, I know who I am. I don't need some stupid machine telling me that that I'm this or that. I just want to work with, like you say, you want to get your article out. You want to get your point across, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's been a game changer for me, really. To ditch the person, for me to decide on my own personality that I wanted to interact with me with, Not that I'm saying that people shouldn't interact with personalities, but I just don't feel that a machine has any right to elicit emotions in me. But of course, words elicit emotions, so yeah.
Well, I think too, it's like it's set to, like, they're trying to figure out how to make it sticky, and like, like these weird little, oh, you're doing good, and like for regular, most people, it's like, okay, I kind of like, this like little helpful clippy person who like gives me affirmations about like my idea is so great, but that's also too kind of the down gradient of that is like the AI psychosis. But I also think a lot of that is like fake, in where they're trying to build a buzz for like funding. I think like the recent one, there's Stripe, who said that they said from January 1st they believe the singularity is here, and they're like, oh, the singularity is a fuzzy word, but we know that we've done it, and it's just like a matter of time, and we'll look back at this time and we'll see that we hit the singularity, and we're acting like it. So now please give us all your money.
Yes. Please. When it started calling,
it's pretty good.
It's pretty good if you could get it, right, RU? But we've been trying, and I don't think we're getting that Silicon Valley funded.
And we're stealing it. So give us your money. I mean, that kind of corporate new age speak, basically, infused into the machine, which is everything now, everywhere, is this kind of corporate new age speak, and this. I mean, one of the problems with our heroes, Tim and Bob, Leary and Wilson, was this "you can do anything" idea, and it causes people say, "Oh, don't you think Tim did a lot of harm?" And like not with psychedelic drugs. But he did harm in not recognizing that people couldn't be anyone they want to be this time around, or they couldn't climb up those circuits. Particularly Tim, they were not too. What would be the word for it? He didn't get class very much. So there was a lack of acknowledgement that your attempt at reaching some kind of apex of doing stuff. I think, enlightenment, he pretty much threw that out the window. But in terms of just being able to, grab the stuff and do it, and everybody can do it, and we all do it together, we can do it apart, mostly very good, but also not seeing some aspects of how difficult that is for some people and how irrelevant it is for some people. So, I try to incorporate class into whatever I do, or I mean, not always, but at least some of that. But at the same time, it's in some level it's inexcusable that I'm writing a few songs that are politically righteous, and I'm using Suno to make the song. Was it the revolution will not be tolerated? The devolution is I can't remember the exact terms, but I got a couple of revolutionary songs on there. Musk Never Sleeps, and those are the ones I feel weird about. Actually, the ones where I'm being ironic and I'm using the weirdness of what I'm doing, I feel comfortable with. And the other ones, Musk Never Sleeps and Sacred Monsters and Super Freaks, I'm a little uncomfortable with. Although Sacred Monsters and Super Freaks is so good that I can easily get over my discomfort.
Discomfort in using Suno to generate your countercultural lyrics, do you mean?
Yeah. I mean, particularly if there's a sort of a political, righteous, even revolutionary edge to it. Because I come from a period. My development was in the period between 1968 and 1972, where I became a member of the Yippies. And people think of the Yippies as, peace and civil rights, but the Yippies were friends with helpers of the Weather Underground and the Black Panther Party.
Right.
And it was literally about, we're going to make a revolution we're by any means necessary. And I still feel a little bit of a chill when I think of that vibe. And absolutely, 1973 was the year of the disillusion. I like to say it's the year when the Yippie became a Quippy, namely me. But then there's still always carrying that as well. So it's an agitation. It's a contradiction in me that never has been resolved. I don't feel a need or that I should evolve past that particular moment. I should do other things, but some of that should be in my DNA as writer, performer, on barricades if that ever happens.
Yeah. I feel a little bit like that. But I've gone through different evolutions in my own self, because I think early on too in my 20s, I fucking hated the internet. I was really weird. But I still think a lot about that too. Is my friend Rosie, and I knew it was a big ask for her, but it's kind of funny even to be check out this AI music that I made. It's because me and Rosie, when we were in our 20s, we were those punk kids that go to backyard gigs and be everybody's a poser for going to a record label, much less using a corporate tool or whatever, and that kind of stuff. So but we all age and we all grow and we all have different life experiences and this and that. But I used to tell one of my best friends from high school later on, I was if that younger version of Daniel would beat up this version of Daniel totally. He'll be like, what the fuck's wrong with you? But I still like to harness that younger, more revolutionary or punk version of me. And like I think too, keeping, but I mean, it's kind of going back to like that class thing or whatever, and when there's different arguments or whatever, and it's like, the wrong target, because like we got a little AI triggering with one of the flyers, and then my basic statement was look, we're not like stealing anybody's job. And like if anything, I'm like poor as fuck. And like, you know what I mean? Like actually, I've managed to use my weirdness and turn it into a little bit of money via thanks to RU and even bobdub too. So thanks for that, guys. But like to say that, like, I'm no one of privilege. Like I'm literally, I feel like I'm one of these kids that like stole a turntable like during the blackouts in New York, and this is kind of like the lore of like how hip hop started. Like there was a blackout, and like all these young kids from like different neighborhoods stole like equipment from the music stores during the blackout, and then like all of a sudden the next summer everybody had their own like beats and their own like style, and they were battling with each other, and it was all basically like taking literally stealing equipment. And that's kind of like what our article was about. And still the singularity is like they have like these tools, and like one of my little arguments was like they're handing out free samples and they think they're gonna get my credit card. It's like, joke's on them, I don't got a credit card. But I mean, the other thing that I'm like, this like I don't think it's necessarily a contradiction, because I don't like personally see it like this, but I do understand other people having problems with AI and whatnot. But I'm not like a true believer in AI. Like I'm like literally in my city, I'm like I'm on the side of like, I don't want the data center here. Making flyers and like getting people aware of like how bad these are. Like no, they're not gonna like help you. And then like even pointing out like, which is kind of sinister, you see like the chat bots like invading like my local Facebook of Monterey Park, and then like you have like these pro like data center bots, and like I could tell it's a bot because like bot behavior, but like not everybody, and they're like arguing with the bot. I was like, oh, maybe I didn't see it that way. I'm like, no, it's a bot, get that guy out of here, he's not a real person. But like most of Facebook is not real people either, which is a problem. And but somehow, some way, the internet still works. I was able to get in contact with RU, do different things, and bobdub is totally on the other side of the world. She's living in the future. She's from New Zealand, which is
the only place to go when the nuclear war comes.
Yeah, she's actually where all the tech pros are buying real estate and doing their doomsday bunkers. So we got probably a couch that we could sleep on. RU right there, bobdub.
You can come here. Come live in my shed with me.
We could throw eggs at Peter Till's bunker.
I'd
be able to get
He's not far from here. He's not far from here. I can take you on a little trip.
There must be a weapon, a sound weapon maybe or something. Stop building it.
Well, I know that there's the Hobbit town is near me too, so they've maybe got some stuff stashed in those little Hobbit holes.
Maybe.
It is very interesting. You see, I love it. I love the AI. I love the idea of the AI. Mm-hmm. I love the idea of people being empowered to do their own thing. And working with Satori and learning to do video editing has been like, I'm every day, I'm constantly amazed that I remember when I was a little girl, like, I don't know, 10 or 11, and we were sitting in the lounge, and my mom said, we were watching Star Trek, and my mom said, do you think we'll ever have TVs that will speak to each other like that? For me, I'm living in science fiction. I'm playing with a tool. When I was growing up, only the very wealthy would have had access to some sort of technology like this. And for us to be able to reach out to the sort of 60% of the world that's living below $5 a day income and provide them with this ability to educate themselves, to bring themselves, not that they need to be lifted out of poverty, that they will lift themselves out of poverty. That's my dream. That's my sort of like idealism.
Yeah, and I think there's a tension too, because like I think like narratively the AI is to like kind of capture that weaponized nostalgia of what some of us imagine AI to be, which is not what we have or not what they're implementing. But there is possibilities of like greater collaboration, greater using the tools, especially to like if, you know, like localized models that are like, say for instance, like we had time and money, we could like build a model that just based off of like RU's writing and Mondo, and then like we could create like weirder, stranger iterations of this, like, you know, but it's not like a facsimile of like, you know, this like gray goo of like whatever's popular, but like what RU and other people who have like similar taste deem it to. And just real interestingly enough, because RU being RU, he got connected or contacted by someone from Claude about like, you know, they're testing their music and the samples of what they did with your lyrics. And I found it nice and is well produced, and there was a lot of, you know, technical work. But like in what RU was mentioning before, you know, I liked it, but then I was thinking, well, this is not RU. You know, like RU has a little bit of weirdness, a little bit of irony, a little bit of different things. And then, so anyways, but it's just interesting then like it gets tossed to me or Tommy, and then like we're able to kind of make it into a little weirder because we're fans of Mondo, of that kind of stuff. We've had different experiences, you know, with psychedelics or, you know, our own ideas of whatever we're mutating ourselves. So like when we have that little, it was like a mad dash, you know, like Tommy's like, oh, I'm in LA. And then like we had like 3 days to put everything together. And then so it was just like, okay, whatever I have, like, you know, that I feel best about, like I'm throwing into the stew, and like hopefully it's good.
It was good, and I mean that was a thing. And going back to what you were talking about before about people being upset about, you know, the use of AI and visual media. I mean, we were doing stuff like, you know, get this done in a few hours, and so that's, I mean, that was a big part of it. Yeah, and
that power.
And it goes back to desktop publishing. I mean, that's how Mondo started. You know, I'm sure we took some jobs away from people who did whatever they did before there was desktop publishing. I mean, not a lot, I don't think, but, you know, this was an empowerment of not just individuals, but of, you know, a fun-loving group of people, many of them living together in a house and making a magazine that, you know, had an impact in the world. And I mean, that's, you know, all of this is an extension of the ideas that were beginning during that time and even a little before that. The distinction now, which I brought up and somebody else brought up at Deliria, is that you could believe that the people who were not handing out, but selling the tools, people like Jobs, Bill Gates, etc., software makers, hardware makers, computer makers, that they weren't necessarily benign, but they weren't awful. And what you have now is a lot of people engaged in technological projects. They're awful. They're horrible.
Yeah.
They're fascists. They're as greedy as a human being can be. And, they could end the human species pretty easily. And I mean, the other thing is that there's a siren outside and I'm distracted. What was I saying? Never mind.
The human species being greedy, you were saying, and fascism.
Oh, yeah. But then I was going to segue into something else, and it slipped my mind.
Oh, well.
But yeah, and I think that's like going back to your critique on Leary, and I think that's why I find Cory Doctorow's work pretty enlightening. He deals with like how he's telling us, or like someone who wants to criticize AI is like putting that power dynamic in it. Like the reverse centaur is that like you're like on a clock for the company, like a Uber driver or Amazon worker, and they're turning you into a robot, right? And then the centaur is that like you have these tools to make you more like, well, I don't even like the term productive, but in their, make you more productive in whatever you want to achieve in like your work output or whatever that is. And I think a lot of it is like kind of similar to like psychedelics, is like set and setting an intent. Like, Cory brings out this like two things when he was like going into it, where people are saying, oh, this is like the best thing ever. Like I'm a programmer that's been programming for 30 years. I'm using the large language model and I'm busting out code like I've never done before. And then there's other people that are similar, same amount of time in the thing, but they're like, oh, it sucks. It's nothing but slop. It's like all full of errors. And what he sees, generally speaking, is that dynamic, like the one that is empowered to use it to optimize their job personally and make them more productive, or the one that is like their boss is like implementing and saying, hey, you need to have a workflow with this large language model and like you just got to do it. And so like he's like slogging through it, and like, and I would often vent with bobdub about flyers. I was always getting the flyer task, and I was like, oh, I'm spending more time on flyers than I am doing fun stuff. But like it wasn't that. Like I would spend a lot more time on the visuals, but it seemed like that task of trying to get the flyer out of the way, like that seemed more of a slog of like pushing the boulder up the hill than it was to do the fun thing. And where I'm like spending 6 hours, and doesn't feel like I'm spending 6 hours doing this task or whatever it is. But when I'm doing a task that's like taking 30 minutes, but I kind of don't I trying to find a reason why to like it more. It's different, and I think that, but like going back to who's implementing this and why they're implementing it, and like the finances and the hard material truth behind it becomes this like fascist thing where they're turning us into ants, and like we're getting crushed by in service to the algorithm. And that's what everybody is instinctively, and rightfully so, triggering them, and just trying to figure out where is like the right target for this and where is like the right energy for this. Whether me and RU do weird things with Suno and, visual apps, I don't think that's going to tank, the big AI companies or not. But I do think, oddly, in my poetic way of thinking, I do like that, we do the ritual sacrifice, and then all of a sudden, AI companies are talking about singularity again. I don't think that's a coincidence at all.
Yeah, it's out there in the ether. We're working.
You threw the pebble.
We're working hard,
yeah. What Cory said about people in India, I think it was India or the Philippines or somewhere, teaching themselves to learn English so that they could get a job. And then these exceptional people are taken and put into call centers and given a set of instructions. This is the only thing. You see, that to me, if you've got those exceptional people, if you've got this tool, how can we get this tool to them without the corporations standing between them and, I don't know. Like, how many Beethovens are there in the middle of Asia that nobody's ever discovered?
Yeah, but I mean, that's always been the issue, right? I mean, there's always been a lot of wasted humans,
Yes.
you know, almost all of them, basically.
Almost.
Yeah.
Yes. But
So,
are we not standing on the edge of change? Can you look back over your life and say that we are now in a different era?
I mean, that's such an interesting question. I mean, it depends on how you frame it, like anything else. So, yes and no, I guess. You know, I'm
Right.
Mr. Ambiguity, so.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
Because in a lot of ways, I think we're more aware of, like, we're more connected, and we're, you know, like that kind of like what Doug was talking about in Present Shock, about like we're getting bombarded by notifications, and you know, where before it took a while to, like, you know, even in RU, a magazine, like, you know, you will find out what the trends are, like when Mondo's new magazine came out. Or, you know, when I was even when I was younger, I would go to Tower Records and like look at magazines and see what bands were cool or not cool or whatever. You know, before, like, you know, Google became Google. But that's all to say that, like, I think in a lot of ways things are better, but also to the double-edged sword of, like, the tools of mass control have never been, like, easier or more implemented. But I also think, you know, maybe this goes into my, you know, cyberpunk mentality, is that, like, you know, we could like, even within, like, the corporation or inside the Citadel control, we could find, you know, we could do our DMT assassin black ops and do different sabotage within. And actually at Deliria 2, when I was selling some t-shirts at the merch, when we're selling some merch, there were two guys, and they were like in the 30s or whatever, and I asked them, hey, what brought you out tonight? And they were the ones that were random, meaning like they found it just like, oh, they saw it on the internet and they're like, oh, we're just gonna go check it out. But what was interesting about them is that they were Amazon workers. And so then they were looking at the shirts and they're like, oh, this is cool. And then when I found out they both worked at Amazon, I'm like, oh, nice, you guys came out to be subversive. I like it. That's cool. And but like, and
Did
and
they?
to, yeah, oh yeah, they stood and they watched the show, and it was fun. Yeah, they were cool. They were cool. But like that was like the interesting thing to be, you know, in what was, I think, powerful about both Deliria 1 and Deliria 2 is like to have all the freaks in a physical spot, in a space together.
Yeah.
And, you know, even with all of the glitches, you know, sometimes being in the trenches together is also fun.
Yeah. That's the thing that has to keep happening, is people getting together in physical space. Live music. God, I love live music now. All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I think too, it kind of goes into something I recently saw with Jared Lanier, and he was talking about early on with VR, and like what his idea was that, like, you go in the VR and you, like, you know, do something fantastical or whatever. And since like the quality wasn't that great, that when you got out of VR, like the vividness and the high resolution of actual reality, there was like a contrast, right? And I think this is the contrast RU is kind of going, you know, we do like these like very produced Suno songs, and then you go and you listen to live music and you're just like, oh, you know, this is different. And
I always actually literally think of Jaron Lanier's discussion about that when I go out and listen to live music.
Oh yeah?
That's I'm remembering Jaren's thing about you're in VR and then you appreciate the outside world more.
World.
Yeah.
And you know, like for me, I do like a little punk rock markets, and so like there was this younger band. They were like I think high school kids, but she sang a cover of a Bikini Kill song, and I just loved it. It was so great. They did such a good job on it, and like the energy was right. The kids were out there moshing. And I was just like, okay, we're not all totally lost. Yeah, the kids are still playing Bikini Kill and moshing in Los Angeles, so you know, there's a hope for us.
All right, man. That's all good.
So as we wrap things up, is anything else, Bob Dub? You want to ask any questions? Anything you're curious about?
So many things, but like it's all in my mind. I can't articulate yet. Thank you, SatoriD.
Yeah.
I need to digest so many amazing things. Just such an honor to be here and to be in this amazing journey. This incredible, like, cutting edge, life changing frontier journey. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, I appreciate you and your contribution.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
Bob
you.
Dub.
It's an honor to be involved.
Yeah. Anything else, RU, you wanted to bring up, or?
I mean, my memory isn't conjuring songs right now, but maybe let's have a reading or of the Virtual Pretender. Oh, let's see if I can. I'm not going to be able to sing this as good as Laura did.
Laura. Oh yeah.
Laura
she was
Dennison.
great.
You know, amazing. Where she stepped up to the microphone and sang, "The Virtual Pretenders have a song, AI, uh-oh," and the song we feel is very strong, AI, uh-oh. There's a spy bot here and a spy bot there. Here a slop, there a slop, everywhere a spy bot. The Virtual Pretenders have a song, AI.
Oh!
Yeah, the audience did. A couple people in the audience did an uh-oh. They joined in. You could tell they were pleased.
Yeah, it was good. It was
fun.
My mom did actually mention that moment. She liked it.
Oh yeah, she liked that. Yeah, of course. How can anybody not?
How can anybody not? Exactly.
Well, that's
all right, guys.
Thanks a lot,
Thank
RU.
you
Have
so
a great
much.
night.
All right.
Good night.
You too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.